Hey riders, Mo here, San Francisco Motorcycle Rental, Eagle Rider. Today, the topic is replacing your chain. I believe if you can adjust your chain, you can replace it with no problem. You need a few things. Obviously, you need a new chain. We like the X-Ring chains. I can get 24,000 miles out of this chain. Certainly, there are higher price options. This chain has been working for me for years. You need a chain tool. We use the RK XL. There are other tools on the market, also effective. You can use the Bike Master. Motion Pro also has a tool. We just happen to like the RK. We've gotten used to it. I've done this job in a parking lot in under a half hour. Had a group of riders on a 24-day rental. About 2/3 of the way through, didn't like what we were seeing with the chain. Went out there to Yosemite, replaced the chain in the parking lot before their day started, and they were back on the road. Please leave suggestions and comments. We'll take a look at those and apply what you're telling us to future videos. So here's an example of a chain that needs to be replaced. So look at how tight it is right here. And if I rotate it, look how loose it is. You won't be able to adjust the chain properly because you have these tight spots and these loose spots. If you tighten it for the loose spot, when it gets to the tight area, you'll be putting so much pressure on the wheel, you risk wearing out your wheel bearings. There's another thing you can look at. You see how the links lift up slightly here? If you take a new chain, you won't be able to lift them up at all. But if you take it to the other area, and there's one there. See the links are coming up? There you go. See, they should not come off the sprocket like that. Those links are coming up too high. But the bigger telling point on this particular, how tight the chain is right there and how loose it is right there. Again, you can't adjust it that way. An interesting thing about this chain is on this particular bike, I've got 14,000 miles on it, and the chain is already needing to be replaced. If you look at the other video, you'll see where I'm getting 18 to 24,000 miles out of a chain. The unique thing about this particular bike, it went on a 4,500 mile trip. Now I give the customers chain lube to put on the chain, but they're not going to clean it. So there again makes the point that, and I believe this customer did lube the chain every 800 miles, which is what I request. But because they're not cleaning it, the grinding effect of the dirt and grit in the chain causes it to wear out prematurely. I have an identical bike put in service around the same time, also has about 14,000 miles, and the chain is just like it was when it's new. To replace the chain, we're going to use this chain cutting tool. And I happen to like the RK tool. So you've got the main part of the chain cutter, the chain tool, you have the cutting pin, and you have these parts here. Now you'll notice that they have different sizes. That's important because the one that has the deeper groove is the one that goes on the top of the rivet. The other one goes on the other side. You can see that smaller groove. It's going to hold the pins in place. And then you also have this piece here, which is going to flare the pin. We're going to be using a rivet link. This is a rivet link, and you'll see how those are flared. So what's happening is this tool here is going to be pressed into that and flare it, and that keeps the link itself in place. As you're doing that, you'll have the one with the smaller groove on the back side to keep the pin from pushing forward. The one with the deeper groove is to push the link over those posts. And the reason you have the deeper groove is because those posts will be sticking up as you push that link on. So we'll see that when we get closer to that point. But for right now, I'm going to push out the pins from a link. And the most important part here is you want to make sure that the guide that holds this in is tight against the link. If you don't do that, the cutting pin has the tendency to walk off of the pin onto the link, and you'll break the cutting pin. Let's take a look. So there's the pin coming out of the guide, and you see it doesn't move around. So we're going to bring it back up, and we're going to secure this tightly. This part here will be secured tightly over the pin as I cut it out. Doesn't matter which one we use, except we won't use the rivet link. It will be around the pin, and we're going to screw first the guide down over the pin. And this is the part that I was saying is important. We have to tighten that. You want to tighten this snug against the link. If it's as loose as it just was, the cutting pin will walk. That's tight. Take the other wrench, and now I'm going to start tightening the cutting pin down. And I should feel it move. If it's starting to bind, I may not be on the pin. So I'm feeling it as I turn it, and there it goes. It just pushed through. If it gets harder than that, it's very likely I'm pushing against the link, and you're going to snap the pin. There's the pin we pushed through. I now have this link, and I have it so that the space, the one with the space, is on the top. I like using the BMXR 525 seal chain. In this case, 525. There are other chains on the market. You can pay a lot more for a chain than you would this Bikemaster, but I can get 25,000 miles out of a Bikemaster chain, and I don't have any issues along the way. So it's hard for me to justify putting on a more expensive chain. If I was racing, I'd be thinking about weight, reducing the rotating weight, and that might make a difference. If I was riding at maximum horsepower, you know, or on the track where you've got maximum horsepower going, there may be other considerations. But keep in mind, a lot of your racers, a lot of your track day guys are putting on a smaller chain. So they'll take a bike that requires a 525 and put a 520 on it. So they're not looking for strength in the chain, they're looking for a lighter weight. And for me, for the purposes here, 25,000 miles, I've never had a chain break. And when I do have them wear out prematurely, it's because of the improper maintenance, typically when the bike is on a long extended ride. I should mention here, many people will say you have to replace the sprockets along with the chain. What you can do is look at the teeth and see if you have them curving, angled forward, looking like shark teeth, and that would be an indicator that it's time to change the sprockets. But when you're using steel sprockets, a steel sprocket is not going to wear anywhere near as fast as an aluminum sprocket. Of course, if you're looking for lightweight and you're running aluminum sprockets, your aluminum sprockets will be fairly well worn out. Now the front sprocket, because it's smaller, is going to have more wear than the rear sprocket, and I'll usually replace the front sprocket somewhere along the way. Because this chain is now going at 14,000 miles, I'm not worried about that front sprocket as of yet. And you can see the rear sprocket, there's no visible wear on those teeth. They're all symmetrical. So I'm going to take the chain, put the new chain into the link, and I'll run this zip tie through both. This is useful because there's not much room in the front, and when you take the cover off, you're going to have to feed the chain through anyway. You can't just slip it over the front sprocket because there's no room. I'll put the securing area in the middle so it doesn't get caught on anything, and I'm simply going to pull the old chain through and let the new chain replace it. Here we are, we've got the two links matched up with each other, ready to put the major link in. We have this lube that we're going to put on the rings before assembling it. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to put the lube, make sure they're fully covered. I'm going to massage it in there to make sure it gets into the groove. We'll now put the link, the rivet link in, put on the outboard X-ring. So this is where we were talking about before. You have these two types of presses. One has the large groove, one has the small groove. The one with the small groove is going to go on the back to hold the pins in place. The one with the large groove is going to go on the new link, on the outside link, to enable us to push it over the pins. I'm making sure right now that I've got the the press with the large groove centered over the pins to allow them to come through. And I'll be checking that periodically as I press this on. This step right here, what you don't want to do is make it too tight. You don't want to press this plate on there so that it's so tight that the link doesn't flex. At the same time, you have to have the pins exposed enough so that they can flare. I'm going to look for here as I rotate it off. I want to make sure that that link levels off evenly, and it's not leveling off the way I would like to see it level off. It stays a little bit kinked, not much, a little bit. Just going to tap these out a little bit. As we take the flaring tool, and we're going to use the same press on the back plate. We don't want to push the pins out. We're just going to center that cone inside the hole, and we're literally just going to tighten it and flare the pin. And there you go. Should take you about a half hour to go from start to finish. In terms of how far to flare the pins, and I've talked to techs about it, and it's one of those things where you think you have to do it more than you do. I've never had a chain come off. I don't know of anybody who's had a rivet link break. I'm sure there's somebody out there, but if you flare it, if you look at the pins, the rivet before you take it off, and you look how that's flared, my objective would be to approximate that same view. Now, you'll recall how we could take the chain, pick the chain up off the sprocket. Even though the chain is very loose, we can't pick it up off the sprocket. And you can see as you adjust the chain, naturally it's going to be consistent all the way through. You wouldn't expect it to be anything else, but when you have a chain that's tight and loose, you know it's time to replace it. And again, the other thing, I can't move those links at all. You see that? They don't move at all. That's how it should be. I'm going to assume that you know how to adjust the chain, so we didn't go through all of that. But a couple of things to keep in mind. Don't be shy about using a flashlight to see exactly where your marks are so you get that lined up exactly right. The other thing is, most chains have a requirement of about anywhere from 35 to 50 millimeters. This is a 36 millimeter socket. So it may seem like the chain is loose, but actually that's borderline too tight. And what happens sometimes, which is what happened just now, once you tighten the axle, once you start tightening the axle, it takes out some of that slack, just depending on where the axle was, etc. You could run into that situation. So I've loosened it some, not real loose, so I'm gonna have to pull on the chain to get that snug up again against it. And now you can see that's closer to my 36 millimeter socket. That's a better way to measure. Obviously, we're just making the point that 35 millimeters is quite a bit. And so it may seem like the chain is loose, but that's where you want it. So we're going to secure these. Make sure your marks are lined up on both sides. And I like to use a flashlight. Helps me get a little more precise. And then you'll tighten it to the specified torque. And in the case of the Multistrada 950, that's going to be 186 Newton meters. If your chain was worn out, you will enjoy the way the bike rides. It's much smoother. You don't have the vibration. You're getting a much more consistent drive, and you won't want to ride on a worn out chain again. And that's it. Installing a new chain.